Hey, welcome into Road to the Rate. I'm Tanner McKnight. This is the podcast that focuses on player development in the White Sox organization. Which of the young guys are going to make the biggest strides this winter heading into 2026? Which guys are going to make the impact on the win-loss total for the White Sox at Wrigley Field in this coming season? Janish, the director of player development, is going to talk about all that and a whole lot more. Oh, by the way, the White Sox made a decision not too long ago. They added Tanner McDougal to the 40-man roster. Well-deserved after the season that Tanner had. And if you're interested, you can go back through a previous episode of Road to the Rate, find Tanner McDougal's interview with us here on the show, get to know him a little bit more. He's the next guy that might be making moves soon to the big leagues. Without any further ado, my conversation with Director of Player Development Janish of the White Sox here on Road to the Rate. So, welcome back into the show, Janish, Director of Player Development for the White Sox, here on Road to the Rate. Obviously, this is going to be our last episode of the offseason. Minor leaguers get to put it away for a little while, too, and everybody needs rest and relaxation. So I guess we kind of get to sum up the year that was in White Sox player development and look forward to a couple things as well. You know, obviously, Paul, the Arizona Fall League has wrapped up. New coaches have been hired, and some of which you're going to work with closely in Sherman Jr. I'm wondering, though, Derek Johnson Jr., pardon. I'm wondering, though, as you have come out of meetings and interviews and post-morts, what's kind of top of mind for you as it regards last year's development for a lot of the young guys in the White Sox organization?
Yeah, I think the thing I would point to is just the arrow pointing in the right direction. I think, as we continue to move forward, we get to know the players better. We can talk about some of those guys that we have, that have had the chance to get to the major league level and had some relative success in the second half of the season. But more importantly, the guys that are coming, and that I think that, you mentioned the Fall League, the Sam Antonacci, the Braden Montgomery, position players that is stick out as guys that have, they're kind of on the map of, maybe the next wave, so to speak. And, they've done a really good job in getting themselves into a position to be considered, hopefully to go to Major League Spring Training. And then, obviously fast forward into next season. I think we're all excited to see what the future holds for those two players in particular. But, overall, I would just say another good year of really establishing kind of the environment that we want our player development to be. And really what that comes down to is, being very objective and creating feedback loops for our players to have really good and clear understanding of who they are and who they can be and, what they're really good at and what they need to continue to improve upon. But ultimately, like, again, just the reputation of being a really competitive group. And I think we've done a good job up to this point, and we'll continue to emphasize some of those things that we really value.
One of the things that 𝗰𝗏 has talked about at the big league level often, and you hear managers talk about this a lot, I'm sure in your own playing career you experienced this quite a bit. Coaches can lead, the staff can lead, but you've got to have players who take that baton and run with it and set the culture and set the expectations and so forth. Is there something similar in terms of player development? You got so many minor league teams, you got the complex, but I would imagine still there are players within the organization that have helped you and your staff set the tone for what player development looks like, much in the same way that you might see, team chemistry or, major league expectations get set in a big league clubhouse. Are those opportunities that you've seen guys take advantage of?
Yeah, and you're right. We do lean a lot on the players, and on the PD side, you mentioned, I just got back from the Dominican from this past week, and that's obviously just the start of the journey for those guys. And you talk about the Birmingham team as an example, and obviously they won the championship again this year. And you talk about Braden Montgomery, you talk about Sam Antonacci, Caden Connor, Riku Nishida, Ryan Galaney. Some of these guys that you just really appreciate the way that they not just play the game, but the way they do their work, their daily routines. And I point to 𝗂𝗏𝗋 who, we all think a lot of and have really, really high aspirations for. But, the thing I would point to with Caleb as well, and that group I just mentioned is the way that they do it. And I've talked to Will about this is, the really exciting thing of what we have going on is some of our players that, we can kind of point to as, the guys that we think are going to have the opportunity to play at the major league level at some point down the road. It's the way that they go about it. And I give our PD staff a ton of credit because it's, that doesn't happen on accident. Those guys have really good makeup, and you start going back to the player acquisition process, whether we drafted them or, like in Braden's example or Kyle Teal's example, we acquired them in a trade. And there's just so much work that goes into that, whether it's our pro group or our amateur group in terms of the player acquisition, and they hand them off to us. And again, I point to our staff for being consistent, showing up, being willing to have hard conversations if they're needed with regards to guys, going about their business the right way, and understanding that that's what's going to be good for them in the long term.
One of the big pieces of news on the minor league side of things throughout the bigs is the decision that was made Tuesday evening to protect certain prospects from the Rule 5 draft coming up here in December. Just briefly, if you're a prospect that fits a certain amount of criteria, it's age-related, comes a time where you need to be put on the 40-man or be subject to the Rule 5 draft the same way that Shane Smith was acquired by the White Sox just this last offseason. All that said, the White Sox added Tanner McDougal to the 40-man roster. Tanner pitched really well. He was a guest here on Road to the Rate, and I'm not taking all the credit for his getting on the 40-man roster, but some. Tanner, talking to you. What stood out about Tanner's season? Why? Let's start with Tanner himself. What stood out about his season, and in what way do you kind of feel good, I guess, for being able to reward a guy for this? I mean, yeah, there's a clock factor to it, but on the other hand, guys got to earn it.
Yeah, and that's exactly what Tanner did. He earned it, and I give him a ton of credit because it's, the talent is undeniable, right? He's got one of the best arms in minor league baseball. The arsenal is really, really, elite on a lot of days. And but what I would point to, honestly, Connor, is his emotional development this year, and his ability to right the ship in a bad inning, so to speak, right? Walk a couple of guys, take a deep breath, and regroup and continue to get through his outing in a productive way. And that to me is what I think we're going to point to this year with him specifically, of kind of like, really taking some strides in the right direction. And, if he gets that right, he's, again, the sky's really the limit. There's talk about whether he's going to start or does he become a reliever down the road. Who knows what the path looks like, but he's proven to us that he's, assuming health, he's going to give himself a chance to pitch in the big leagues, and maybe sooner than later. But just really proud of Tanner for, again, the steps that he's taken, and he really took it to heart last offseason to come into spring training motivated, and going into the season he kind of hit the ground running, and once he got going, there was really no stopping him. He pitched strong throughout the entire year, and had the chance to pitch in the AA playoffs. And for those guys, those are perceived the biggest games that they play in all year. And in that context, Tanner was just a really high level competitor, man. That's the thing I say about him, and I may have said this on here before, but he really likes to be in the fire. And I'm just really excited for him. Getting through the season healthy obviously was primary, and the results were as good as we could have hoped.
Nothing against everybody else who's been on this show, but Tanner was one of my all-time favorite interviews on this show for some of the things that made the air and some of the things that didn't. It all speaks to his competitive fire and his willingness to compete. Congratulations to him. If you haven't caught that episode, go back and listen to it. We caught up with Tanner toward the end of the season, just a little bit after the All-Star break, if memory serves. Paul, this is a decision that every organization has to make, protecting guys and placing them on the 40-man or not. The White Sox had some more spaces available on the 40-man to you. What is it that goes into your assessment, along with Chris Getz and the front office, everybody else in it? How much of it is data-based and stat-based? How much of it is a feel? How much of it is kind of understanding where the league is on a particular guy? If you're out there and I'm just going to pick a team, the Rays are really interested in player X of yours because he had him on the draft board and all this other kind of stuff. How do we balance out all of those things to decide whether this player or that player needs to be put on the 40 in order to protect him from the Rule 5 draft?
Yeah, I think it's a collaborative process, and I give Chris and Josh Barfield and Jen Wong a lot of credit for the the systems that they put in place, and we do the best we can to provide some of the subjective information relative to the players that we get to know them a little bit better because we're around them every single day, and again, I point to our staff and give them a lot of credit. And it's the kind of thing where you really just have to trust your process. I don't think you can spend a whole lot of time worrying about what another team may or may not do. It's just there's situations that you feel like really compelled to for guys that are in your organization that they're going to help your major league club, and that's how you make those decisions. And hopefully at some point we get down the road where the decisions continue to become tougher and tougher because of the players in question. And that's what you're hoping to shoot for. And Shane Smith's a great example. We benefited from picking him up from Milwaukee last year, and to his credit, he took care of the rest.
I'm wondering too, as it regards Tanner McDougal and kind of the rest of the White Sox minor league pitching, kind of structure to this point, with few exceptions, you guys have been, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you guys have been pretty aggressive in making sure that the workloads for a lot of pitchers have been scaled back when you felt it's appropriate. You haven't pushed a whole lot with some of these arms. And I'm wondering, at what point that philosophy kind of calcified for you guys as it regards how many innings and who's getting what and how deep you want to push them. You've been creative with some bullpen assignments with guys, and that's obviously been successful in getting Grant Taylor to the big leagues quickly and accumulating some MLB saves. Is that philosophy where it needed to be over the last 2 years? Is that something that can evolve some, that might change, or is this kind of what you do?
I think it has to continue to evolve, and I think you just have to be adaptable. And there's context for all of these players, and we have some Cardinal knowledge about them, kind of under the hood, so to speak. And but the one thing I feel comfortable saying is, you don't want to have the reins on guys if you think that they can do some things down the road. And obviously, health is primary. Tanner, as an example, this year, had a really good full season and is really in a good spot next year to really do what the organization asks of him, regardless of the role. And you mentioned Grant Taylor. I would cite him as we can all agree he's a unique talent, right? And can influence the major league level in a way that not a ton of guys can. So, pitching out of the bullpen currently, I wouldn't say that starting at some point down the road is going to be off the table for him, and what that looks like for his path, and we can point back to Garrett Crochet and, the way that unfolded. And, a little farther down the org, you look at like a Christian Opper who, had a tremendous year and was healthy for the entire year. And we kept a really close eye on him because it was really his first full season of pitching consistently on the schedule that he was able to recover and get through the entire season healthy. So there's variables to all of them. There's context that we try to be aware of, but at the end of the day, we're trying to maximize their value based on, keeping them healthy, and then also the timeline of what it looks like for them to really be able to kind of get to the major league level and have an impact.
Do you guys feel, I would bet I know the answer to it, but I think it's just the important follow-up. Do you guys feel as an organization that you can raise starters that can get into the 7th inning and, maybe even pitch into the 8th inning as part of a skill set while you're doing things this way?
Yeah, I think it's, that's a good question, and I think an industry question right now. But I think the way that we try to look at it is, you do the best you can to maximize who they are at the current time. And when the time comes for them to hopefully get to the major league level, the calculus changes a little bit. Like, how do they impact the major league level most appropriately, in the given year? And but to answer the question, the aspiration would be to have as many guys, starter available as you can, right? And what that translates to the major league level is going to be determined in most cases.
I'm wondering how I think we'll talk about this probably in more detail once we get to spring training. We've got some more knowns on our side of the thing, but you guys are going to work in tandem with the, with the training staff, I would imagine, the player development and the training staff, with all the pitchers that are going to be coming back from Tommy John, as you always do. It's just that the White Sox look to have a lot of guys right around kind of that same time period, or maybe stretched out over 6 weeks or so later in the next summer, that are all going to be coming back. So what does that kind of handoff look like between the training staff, between the player dev staff, when you've got a guy like, you've got Mason Adams and Ky Bush, 𝗵𝗺 Drew Thorpe, all these names? You're going to have to kind of place them in the right spot. You've got to know how healthy they are. How does that process look now, and what's it going to look like once we get closer to, throwing live action for these arms?
Yeah, I look at it. It's a good problem to have with a bunch of those guys coming back during the year. And a 𝗵𝗀 type example is going to be different than, Mason Adams, who you hope is going to, come back and start, right? And so I just think, our medical group does such a good job, and, our performance group does such a good job of making sure we're keeping tabs on players and how they are recovering, right? And it's different. All their bodies are different. So I think it's we're on our side, a lot of those guys we've had in our system, and we're excited about them, coming back healthy, hopefully, potentially. And the one thing I'll share too is I think that we'll exercise caution, because you don't want to leverage a guy coming back from a significant surgery of Tommy John as the example, quicker than you should, understanding like you could potentially be leveraging the rest of the season. So we'll exercise caution, but yeah, being transparent, I think that our group, and even our major league group is excited about the potential for those guys to come back and help the team. If at some point during the season, probably the second half, depending on who we're talking about. But yeah, that they'll probably be put in situations, assuming health, to impact the major league club.
Yeah, I know a lot of White Sox fans are excited about the names we mentioned too. There's just a lot of talent there, and it's unfortunate. Arm injuries happen. Every team in baseball would love to have the magic sauce to fix this issue, but it's the era we live in. I want to flip over to the hitting side a little bit. You guys made your coaching hires for the White Sox, of course, replacing a hitting coach and pitching coach at the major league level, but alongside and in addition to Sherman Johnson Jr., the new minor league hitting coordinator for the White Sox. Where were you in the interviews? How were you involved in this? How did player dev get their hands in a guy that's going to be all around the minor leaguers? Tell us a little bit about Sherman and what will his kind of responsibilities, his day-to-day look like?
Yeah, so the thing I'll share initially is, the communication on the front end of the hiring process was just really, really good. Sherman obviously comes from Baltimore and had been in the major leagues this past year, and there's alignment with Ryan Fuller and in our hitting group, which kind of is pretty obvious, and that's what I would point to. We saw some successes on the offensive side, again pointing to some of the guys that actually were in the major leagues, and there's a couple more coming, hopefully. And yeah, the thing that's very evident about Sherm is that he really wants to work. We kind of were joking already, and he's like, "Hey man, I'm going to be on the road all the time. Like, I got to see these guys." And so yeah, we're excited about him, and he's excited about being a part of our group. And it's very evident there's going to be very quick alignment.
Do you start by kind of handing over some personnel files about some of the players to him? I'm thinking, for instance, you mentioned that he likes to work. The first guy that I thought of in the minor league side is Braden Montgomery, who likes to swing like a gajillion times before the game. I would imagine those two are going to get along real quickly because how much they like to. Is that the kind of stuff that you want him to know about right away, so he's got a little background on these guys, or does he want to explore on his own?
Yeah, no, we've definitely, scouting reports, cheat sheets, so to speak. We we all are, for better or for worse, addicted to this game. And so we've already spent a lot of time talking about players, and he's got questions. And it's not just me, it's our entire group, right? Like our affiliate staffs, and who get to know these players as well as anybody. And yeah, so we definitely are going to spend the off season trying to be productive with regards to getting him up to speed. But again, to his credit, he's kind of hit the ground running and has already been in communication with a bunch of the guys, and yeah, we'll be excited about getting to spring training and having everybody being on the ground floor.
Swing decisions was such a big topic of conversation with Ryan Fuller. It was all around the major league clubhouse in the first part of the season, and then kind of the overall narrative switched to hitting the fastball, covering the fastball, and that led to a lot of great results at the big league level last year. I'm wondering, is swing decision, this phrase that we use now for swinging at good stuff and letting bad stuff go, and putting a good contact on a good pitch. Is this something that you want to be the hallmark? Is this something that is this part of why Sherman is the guy, that he kind of fits this swing decision identity, and that's a great place to start with development?
Yeah, the swing decision, that's what I refer to as the alignment that we have with Sherman pretty much immediately. And we joke about it, but taking the balls and swinging at the strikes, and I'll poke fun at myself. I didn't have a really good swing, but if you swung at a pitch right down the middle, you gave yourself a better chance. And on the opposite side of that, if you got a really good swing and you swing at a bad pitch, you're going to have trouble having success. So, yeah, and there's some nuance to that as well with regards to training environments that, we're really valuing. And I know, Derek Sherman at the major league level and on down, we're going to continue to try to promote what we feel like is important at the top. But yeah, the swing decision thing is a priority, and we're working hard to try to come up with creative ways to make guys better at it.
I'm wondering too, if there's a percentage you can put on it. I know everybody wants to do this with baseball because we all came up playing MLB The Show or Out of the Park Baseball or whatever. And you've got the numbers, right? You've got numbers attached to guys. He's got a 60 in power, and not like the scouting scale, like out of 100, and this is concrete. How much do you think that's nature versus nurture in a particular player these days? Like what percentage do you think that is?
You're talking about the power specifically?
No, sorry, the swing decision, right? The idea that you can teach a good swing, or you can not a good swing, but swinging at the right pitches.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things it is tough, and then I do think it's the kind of thing that you have to talk about out loud, and you have to highlight, and you have to have feedback loops, and understand that it's the timeline is going to be different for different players. But yeah, we do feel that, and that's what I talk about being creative. We do feel that there's in the training environment, in spring training as an example, or before a game with your routines throughout the season, we do think it's valuable to put guys in situations that are uncomfortable and continue to promote the significance of those training environments. But yeah, we saw this year across the minor leagues, we took a big jump as a group on the decision. So yeah, it is a hard thing to train, and it is a hard thing to see significant, growth in, but we do believe it can get better, and it's going to be like anything else. Some guys are going to take to it a little bit quicker, but we hope over the course of time, with the processes that we have in place, that, everybody's going to be on board and continue to improve.
Wanted to ask you this as we kind of end the show for the winter and get back to things in spring training. Obviously, the thing that I'm thinking about is, all right, I know all these prospects. We watched them. We highlighted them on the broadcast throughout the season. Where are they going to all play next year? And I know you guys wait, to have those assignments come out. I'm not going to ask you where guys are going, because that wouldn't be fair to the players themselves, to have one thing said and maybe they don't, maybe they do. But for you, Paul, like, how many players do you know are headed to this place or that place? And how much can these guys change where their assignments are going to be through spring training, through the winter? How is there a hard and fast calculus to this? Is it a lot of feel? Do you wait to see where guys are at in spring training and kind of go from there?
Yeah, it's, trying to make any of those assessments right now wouldn't be fair to anybody, right? But yeah, there is an element of that show up in spring training and see what they look like and how they play. But at the end of the day, a lot of what they did this year is gonna dictate where they have the opportunity to go. And if you're talking about Charlotte or Birmingham, it's there's implications with NRIs that go to spring training and who's going to trickle down to Charlotte, and we have to adjust on our side, and that's just part of the calculus. And so yeah, we knowing where they're going to go is a tough problem to solve right now. But what the one thing I would share on that is what we continue to embrace is we really want guys that are ready to have success at the next level. And if that means going from Winston to Birmingham, or if that means going from Birmingham to Charlotte, and then obviously from Charlotte to the big leagues, we want to try to do the best we can to make guys, get them into a good spot. So they're not just trying to get to that next level, they're going to the next level to have success.
Paul, appreciate it as always. Great talking to you throughout the year. Have a fantastic winter, and we'll catch you in spring training, talk about all the new guys that have come into the system and made big strides heading into Glendale. Thanks, Paul.
I appreciate it and look forward to it.
Thanks so much for watching and listening to Road to the Rate here on CHSN. Really appreciate you being with us throughout the season. We're taking a little break. Minor leaguers get to take a little break. Paul Janish gets to take a little break. Maybe you need one as well. We'll be back at the start of spring training talking to each and every White Sox prospect who's headed to Rate Field over the next few years. Very excited to bring that to you once we land in Glendale come February. Again, thanks for watching and listening. Look forward to talking to you in February right here on Road to the Rate on CHSN.